Okay, so Lou Lamoriello is no longer the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. We knew that. Lou Lamoriello now works for the New York Islanders. We sort of knew that. And Mark Hunter is no longer with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We did not know that. A lot of people assumed it, but now we got confirmation. It's not entirely true he's not with the Leafs. So the information is that he is under contract with the Leafs and had the option of going through the upcoming draft in a month, the 2018 draft, with the Leafs. The Leafs decided, no thanks. That's like, hi, we're not going to be friends anymore, but could you still help me pick out what I'm going to wear for prom in a month? Show up in a purple kilt, a neon green blazer, and a red top hat? So, what did we just discuss? We discussed information. Facts. Now we know the facts. This has been the challenge talking about what's going on in the Leafs front office. Because, dude, it's the Leafs front office. It's a huge deal. We're talking about the old GM with Lou Lamoriello. We're talking about the new GM with Kyle Dubas. And we're talking about a candidate for GM and almost became the GM, Mark Hunter. If you work for a sports radio station, website, TV station, you gotta talk about this. There's an appetite for it. I was getting messages constantly. What do you think of this rumor? What do you think of that rumor? Then something happens. What do you think of this thing? And I made some videos about it and I talked about it on the podcast, but really, there weren't many facts out there. Most of what has been discussed are theories and assumptions and guesses. People don't actually know what has happened. This was a bad thing. It was a good thing. The Leafs are gonna get worse. This is part of the process. You know what this whole thing has been? You ever had the trail mix with the M&Ms in it? And you're looking at it like, I'm just here for the candy. But most of it is seeds and raisins and nuts! Similarly, this has been mostly nuts. And separating fact from theory has been difficult. So before I go any further, I have to bring on someone who's smarter than I am. Which doesn't narrow it down much, so I'll just tell you. Reporter Chris Johnston of Sportsnet. I want to show you a tweet. This is from the Toronto Star's Kevin McGran. I had one agent tell me this is a firestorm of Brendan Shanahan's creation. Could still have Lou as GM with Dubas and Hunter under him. Could have left things as they were and had to know events would play out this way. So alright CJ, this is all Brendan Shanahan apparently. What's he thinking in all this?
Steve, before I tell you what Brendan Shanahan is thinking, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking. What is going on here? Twitter has been a hot mess today and I'm confused why. When Brendan Shanahan approached this offseason, he had one choice to make. Does he let Kyle Dubas go or not? As soon as he looked at his choices and decided that Kyle was his guy, he had to be the general manager, and he had a very good idea in making that decision that Mark Hunter wouldn't stay and that Lou Lamoriello would move on as well. And who among us can argue with him? Kyle's 32, Mark Hunter's 55, and Lou is going to be 76 in the fall. Who would you choose?
Alright, how about this? So the draft is coming up. In 2015, it was Dubas and Hunter splitting duties. Then Lou came on board. What happened after that? And now that Lou is gone and Dubas is in charge, what do you expect for the 2018 draft?
One of the toughest things about covering this team the last few years has been gleaning real information about how things were working among the three-headed monster in the Leafs front office. But what I can tell you is this. Kyle Dubas never had more of an impact on the Leafs draft than that draft back in 2015 in Florida, when he was working the phones on what eventually became the Phil Kessel trade with Pittsburgh and ran the draft table along with Mark Hunter. Once Lou Lamoriello came in, Kyle was reassigned to running the Toronto Marlies and didn't have the same impact in the drafting process. But now with Mark Hunter gone, you'd have to think he's going to take over the reins a month from now when the Leafs draft again in Dallas.
See, that's interesting. Sometimes I forget that the Phil Kessel trade actually happened before Lou Lamoriello was Leafs GM, and that was like such a huge trade. So, now there are vacancies in the Leafs front office. What are the odds they maybe give your boy a job?
Dude, I've got to be honest with you. I spoke with Brendan Shanahan today, and I think they've got a few guys ahead of you on the list. But what can you do? You got to stay positive. You got to believe you can do it. Stranger things have happened.
If you want to read more from Chris, and I highly recommend you do, he's got a new article about this on sportsnet.ca called Dubas solely in driver's seat after front office changes. Someone else had thoughts on this that I want to show you, and they're usually really good at having kind of a neutral take on things. Anthony Petrelli says, basically all the Leafs takes are how can you be mad when you can't prove what Hunter has contributed, but if the shoe was on the other foot and Dubas was leaving, the sky would be falling. On Twitter, that is. I'm going to wait to see who Dubas brings in as management replacements first, but I will say that over the last 3 years, the Leafs have steadily improved. Sucks to lose anyone now. Anthony and I had a bit of a Twitter back and forth, and I was talking about, well, you know, it was the Leafs' plan to bring in Dubas as GM 3 years ago. Lou said it himself, which isn't actually true. It always looked like there would be an opening in 3 years, which obviously the Leafs took, but Lou said that Dubas would be the GM eventually. Even though the 3-year timeline doesn't necessarily apply, Dubas leaving would be worse than Hunter leaving, in my opinion. Hunter was a candidate to be GM, and he might have even been a good GM, but they straight up said the plan was to make Dubas GM eventually. And Lou Lamoriello left because rather than be a senior advisor to the Leafs, he got a better job with the Islanders. It gave him more power. That makes sense. So let's say then the Leafs make Mark Hunter the general manager. Well, if Mark Hunter's the GM, that means Lou is not the GM, so I assume he'd be leaving for the Islanders anyway. And of course Dubas would leave because he's gotten offers to work with other NHL teams. There was the thing with the Coyotes, the Colorado Avalanche offered him a job, and we'd be right here in the same mess with one guy left out of 3. But look, at some point the Leafs had to make a decision. They had to move on. It's not good when you lose expertise, and Hunter and Lou had expertise. It's also not good when someone who you really, really liked leaves your team for another team, and that team is in the Eastern Conference, the Islanders. It's also not good when the Islanders' chance of signing John Tavares improves. But the sense I'm getting is that there's this air of dread. Oh my god, the Leafs have been good for a couple years. Oh my god, what if they're not good anymore? Well, what about this air of excitement, this air of curiosity? Who are they gonna hire? Brandon Pridham, who is with the Toronto Maple Leafs, his role is assistant to the general manager. Does he become assistant general manager? Ron Francis was a name that got brought up, and Eric Tulsky was attached to him. Does he get brought in as another kind of stats guy? Slash more than that, because that's insulting. Is it a wild card? Is it someone who we've never even thought of or heard of? Look, whether it was Dubas or Hunter, this day was going to come. For 3 years, we've just been waiting for the kablooey. Well, here's the kablooey. And like most kablooeys, it leaves a bit of a mess. Some things need to be cleaned up. But you know what else you have? A guy in charge who's probably going to be in charge for a while. A direction, a potentially new way of thinking. I'm excited to see what happens next. I'm excited to see if I get a chance to fix this room before I have to make another video. So, what do you think about all this? What do you think about all the noise surrounding what's just happened with Lou Lamoriello and Mark Hunter leaving? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing that could leave room for good things? Is it a bad thing that leaves room for more bad things? Who do you think the potential replacements are? What do you actually expect Dubas to do now that he appears to be the man? And how much are the Leafs going to get from the Islanders for Matt Martin? So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you liked this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. Tell all your friends. Don't forget to check out Chris Johnson's article on sportsnet.ca. And I'm excited to see where this thing goes.